This lesson. We're glad that you're here this morning. Welcome to all of you who are gathered here with us in this room here. Welcome to those who are gathering with us as well via our live stream, worshiping with us online on this rainy day. It's a great day to worship God together. So a couple of weeks ago, Alyssa and I went on a little road trip. And on that road trip, we passed through a little town called Tucumcari, New Mexico. Anybody been to Tucumcari, New Mexico? Population of about 4,000. They have a Dairy Queen. They have a historic Route 66 something or other monument or museum. We didn't actually stop at those places or anywhere else in Tucumcari, New Mexico. But as we drove through Tucumcari, New Mexico, I told the only story I know, more of an anecdote, about Tucumcari, New Mexico, and that is that when I was driving through that town at 8 or 9 years old, I was not driving, my family was driving through that town, we encountered the thickest, heaviest thunderstorm that I think I could remember in my life. It was the kind of storm, you know these kinds of storms, right? You may have driven through one yourself, where the freeway turns into like 5-mile-an-hour driving, and even in daytime, it's night. I was telling Alyssa about it. I called it a gully washer. She made fun of me for that. How old are you? A gully washer? And then the funniest thing happened, not 2 or 3 hours after that, I'm not even sure where we were on the road, I had to change my tune because a storm every bit as heavy, maybe even heavier, descended on us and started pouring down rain, like rain so fast the windshield wipers are going as fast as they can and they're still losing the race. Like rain so fast it's like pounding on the roof and on the windshield and it sounds like hammers pounding up. We turn the audiobook off, we turn the hazard lights on, and we're just driving so slow and it's 4 p.m. and it's dark outside. And you're just like, wow, look at this storm. And it was only afterwards, maybe you've had this experience before too, it was really only afterwards that I realized like how tense I had been. I don't know how long it lasted. It felt like an hour. But like my shoulders and my arms, I was gripping the wheel. I didn't even realize. It was only later that I realized like how my heart had sped up as I was driving through that storm. And it took some time. It was kind of slowing back down. And we had listened to music for a long time. We listened to our audiobook on the trip. And then that storm came, and it was like so loud, you're having to kind of shout to the person next to you. And then it suddenly starts to slow down. And you just notice like how quiet it is. Or how maybe loud it was, might be another way to put it. Really just everything looks and feels so different on the other side of the storm. And today, if you haven't guessed it already, we're going to be looking at a passage about a storm that comes crashing down from heaven in Luke chapter 8. And I invite you to get out a Bible and turn there if you have one ready and would like to follow along. I try to set the scene with that story of that gully washer near Tucumcari, New Mexico. But I think what you're going to find is that it doesn't really compare. It's hard to find something relatable to this story. So you got to use your imagination just a little bit. So replace that slick but sturdy I-40 freeway with violent waves roiling beneath your feet. Like I imagine it like, if you're like trying to stand up in an earthquake and there's no solid ground. Replace the rooftop and the windshield that were pounding like hammers with the rain with just like unimpeded sky. And the rain is just coming down in buckets, like right on, soaking your clothes, like stinging your eyes. I'm in like a 2-ton SUV on the freeway. Replace that with a first-century wooden boat. Can you imagine being in a storm like that? If it helps at all, archaeologists actually found this in the 1980s. It's the remains of a first-century wooden boat. It's really cool. They found this on the Sea of Galilee. During the 80s, there was a big drought in that area, and the water receded so much that they found this boat there. And they dated it back to the 1st century. It's the wooden remains. You can kind of see a little picture here. Now, I don't know that this is the exact kind of boat that they were in, but this is the kind of boat that fishermen used. Might be the kind of boat you get into to cross over to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. It's 27 feet long. It's 7 feet wide. This is no Carnival cruise ship, is it? I mean, you're going to feel the waves on a calm day. So what about a day when the storm is so great that even seasoned fishermen who are used to all of this are crying out in fear? So in great fear, they cry out, "Master, Master, we are perishing." We're going to talk about that moment. But actually, what I'm most interested in today is the view of things on the other side. What things look like and feel like in the calm and the quiet on the other side of that storm. When the disciples realize, once again, that the one they call Master, Master is so much more and wants so much more than they even imagined. It's the second in our series of lessons on Jesus as a misunderstood master in the Gospel of Luke, a master who is more and who wants more of his followers. And today I want to talk about the view of that master on the other side of this storm. And I wonder if it's the kind of thing that might be helpful to us also. Because in our lives, we may face storms too. So let's find out. Luke chapter 8. Let's begin where it begins in verse 22. One day, Jesus got into a boat with his disciples, and he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side of the lake." So they set out, and as they sailed, he fell asleep. Now, this part here is kind of one of the great curiosities of this passage, as we're going to find in just a little bit. But both Matthew and Mark and Luke all point out this fact. They get out on the water. Jesus takes a nap. Apparently, he sleeps very heavily. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a second. So Jesus is asleep. And a windstorm, I think the ancient Greeks call it a gully washer, came down from the lake. And they were it was filling up with water. And they were in danger. And if you think about that boat I showed you earlier, fill it out in your mind, the pieces that are missing. You can imagine how a boat like that would fill up with water, like it's coming down from above. It's coming up over the sides. And it's starting to sink. And so they cry out. They went and woke him, Jesus. They had to wake him up. Strange. But they cry out to him, "Master, Master, we are perishing." It's the same word we talked about last week in Luke chapter 5. Master, epistata, we are perishing. And he awoke and rebuked the wind and the raging waves, and they ceased. And there was a calm. And at this point, we find the only recorded words of Jesus in this moment. 4 words. And Jesus said to them, "Where is your faith? Where's your faith?" And they were afraid and they marveled, saying to one another, "Who then is this, that he commands even the winds and the water, and they obey him?" Who is this? The disciples say. Now, don't those words just hang on the quiet of the air after this storm? Who is this? Like, even though they've called him Master, Master, when they see what he does in this moment when they need it the most, when they see his power, when they see him calm this storm, even the disciples who called him Master, Master, they are having to just totally reassess and recalibrate anew and afresh. Who is this? What have we gotten ourselves into? Who are we following here? Who is this, they say? Because things look different to them. Very different. In the light after this storm. That's actually something I want us to really focus in on this morning. It may seem obvious, but I want to ask you to think about, how does it look different to them? How does Jesus look different to them than he did before the storm? Than he did during the storm? What are they seeing now in the light after the storm? Because before the storm, I think it's safe to say that they already saw that Jesus was special, that Jesus was powerful. They already are following him. They're calling him their master, and they have seen more than a few pieces of evidence to suggest to them that God's power works through this Jesus. I made a little list here. These are all things that Jesus has done in the presence of the disciples before he ever gets into the boat with them and this storm happens. And it's a pretty long list. Sorry if the font is too small. It's a long list. So he heals a man who's possessed with a demon. He heals Simon's mother-in-law. We talked about that last week. And the rest of that story is he stays out in the city up until sundown, and the whole town is just bringing him all the people who need his attention, and he heals each and every one. He made all those fish to be miraculously caught in the story we dwelled on last week. He healed a man who had leprosy. He healed a man who was paralyzed. He heals a centurion's servant from afar. Like, he doesn't even go there. He just says the word and he's healed. He raises the widow's son who has died, like touches the coffin and raises him up to life. All these things the disciples have seen before they ever get into the boat with him. So they've learned about Jesus' power, safe to say. But then the storm comes. And the wailing wind and the walls of waves washing over the boat are crashing in. And suddenly, it's not just other people, but the disciples who are in the middle of the problem. And suddenly, the disciples are facing something they haven't faced before. This storm comes in, and during the storm, it really calls into question the power of their master. Because now they're facing something else that's truly and terrifyingly powerful. And they really think they're going to drown. They say, Master, Master, we're perishing, because in this moment, they're beginning to question and maybe even believe that this power of the storm is too much for them. Maybe it's too much for him. But then Jesus raises up and he speaks. What do they find? Even the winds and the waves obey him. His power is greater even than we first believed. His power is greater even than we had it in our minds. His power is greater even than this mighty storm. Who is this who can do the things that only the creator of the universe could do? You see, the disciples knew before the storm Jesus was powerful, but after the storm, they learn even more so, and from their own experience, just how powerful Jesus really is. You know, before the storm, the disciples knew that Jesus was a caring person. Would you say it's fair to say that they've probably picked up on that fact by now? That he's a caring person, and that when he's present in the lives of people, it makes a difference for them. They know that. If I show you this list again of the things Jesus does before the boat and before the storm, what you see is that it's not just that he does powerful things, but that he cares about people. that he cares very deeply. So he healed a man who had leprosy. It's not just that he healed him. Do you remember what he did? He reaches out his hand and he touches him. What a difference that would have made to a person with leprosy. He touches him and says, I choose to heal you. When he stayed out in the city until sundown, healing every person that was brought to him. Like, we don't even know the names of all the people that he healed, but Christ cared enough about each of them to take care of each and every one. The story about the widow's son that Jesus raises from the dead, this widow doesn't even cry out to Jesus or ask that Jesus heal her son. We don't even know that she thinks of this as a possibility. What happens is Jesus arrives in the town the same time that a funeral procession is going on, and he sees the woman weeping over her son. And verse 13 of Luke 7 says, his heart went out to her. And the first thing he says is, don't cry. And then he touches and he heals the son, raises him to life. The disciples have seen all this evidence that Jesus cares. And it makes a difference when he's with people. But then the storm comes. And it actually calls into question for them the care of their master. Because now they're the ones in the center of this crisis. And the waves are crashing in, and the boat is filling up. And what is Jesus doing? You remember? Strange. He's asleep. And he may be there with them, but he doesn't seem to be there for them in this moment that they say, we really need your help. But there he is asleep. And they begin to wonder, does Jesus even care about us? I'm not just speculating about this. In Mark's account of this same story, the words on the disciples' lips are, Teacher, do you not care? Do you not care that we're perishing? But then Jesus rises up and he speaks, and what do they see? Jesus was so much more in control of the situation than it seemed like to them in the moment. Jesus was so much more aware and attentive to their needs and what they were going through. Jesus was, in fact, with them in the way that they needed him to be with them all along in the boat. And they knew Christ's care before. But now that it's their problem and their prayer, and they cry out and he answers, don't you think that they see all the more how much he truly cares? And maybe this is actually the beautiful thing about storms. Storms like the one in this story, or storms like the ones we may face in our lives. Could it be that the storms in life actually might help us to get a new and fresh and personal insight into God's awesome power, into God's caring presence in our lives? And after the storm has passed, we can see how God's power really was more powerful than the storm. See it maybe in a way that was hard to see in the moment. And after the storm has passed, we can see that God really was present and caring for us and with us in the moment in a way that was really hard to recognize in the thick of it, when it felt like we're alone or that he wasn't listening. It's like what Paul says in 1 Corinthians when he's gone through a metaphorical storm in his own life. He says, we were under great pressure then, far beyond our ability to endure, so that we despaired of life itself. We felt that we'd received the sentence of death. But, he says this looking back now, But this happened, that we might not rely on ourselves, but on God who raises from the dead. And in the view from after the storm, he can now look back and say, he's delivered us from such a deadly peril. And now I know he will deliver us again. From this vantage point here, Paul can say that the Lord is the God of all comfort, who comforts us in our troubles because he sees all this with new eyes in the light that follows the storm. And I just wonder how much more so if one day we are afforded a glimpse of what God sees from heaven. How much more so might we see that every one of those storms holds new meaning for us. Greater evidence for us of God's power and God's presence in his care. All these things might be hard to see in the thick of it, in the midst of the storms in our lives. But maybe what Luke 8 gives us, and this master who is greater than the winds and the waves, maybe what it gives us is a sense of hope that we might someday see more clearly how God was with us, and powerfully so, in the view from after the storm. Now, I don't know how that lands with you or if it brings you any comfort if today you come and you're in the midst of a storm in your life. If that's you today, I just want to say to you, just hang in there and let us know how we can pray for you because it's tough. But maybe this is the kind of lesson that we need to tuck away in our hearts on a sunny day so that it's there for us when the storm might come. Like, we need to know these things that the disciples learn. We need to know that God is more powerful before the storm comes so that when the storm comes and it's so hard to see it, we have that in our hearts. We need to know that God will be with us when we need him and that he's present with us and cares about us for those times when it's hard to grasp onto some evidence that shows it to us, when things are difficult. We need these truths in us so that we're ready for the storm. You know, one last thing, and I'll close with this, that really challenges me about this passage is, well, it's the 4 words that Christ actually speaks in it. You remember those 4 words? The only 4 we've got from Jesus in this story are, where is your faith? Where is your faith? What do you make of that? Is Christ laying on heavy a guilt trip here for them? Kicking them when they're down? It is a rebuke of sorts. It really is. But also, doesn't Christ know how important and how blessed they would be if they can hold on to some of what they had before the storm and certainly what they have after the storm? Doesn't Christ know what a difference it's going to make if they can hold tightly to that, a little more tightly than they did when they're in the midst of that storm? Like, if they can just remember what they saw before, that he really is powerful, and hold on to what they've been through before and say, God got me through that there. If they can hold on to that during the storm, won't that be such a blessing? If they can remember that God has cared for them in the past, if they can remember evidence of storms they've been through and realize that God was caring with them still, what a blessing that would be. Where is your faith? Like, if you have it, it really helps. Christ wants them to not let go of what they know when it's hardest for them to know it. And isn't that what faith is? I don't remember who said it, but there's somebody else who put it like this. Don't forget in the dark what you learned in the light. And that seems like a pretty good takeaway from this passage here. Don't forget in the dark what you learned in the light. That means trusting in and holding on as best you can to what we know to be true about God's power, to what we know to be true about how much God cares for you. Hold on to those things in the dark, in the storm, when it's hardest for us to see it. Because if we just hold on, we may see all the more clearly later. God was more powerful. God was with us. We may see all these things so much more clearly on the other side of the storm. Well, maybe this is something that brings comfort or challenge to you in your life. If you are today in a time in your life that you consider to be a storm, like I said before, can we encourage you today to hang in there and hang on to those things that you know in your heart to be true, even if it's hard to see them? God is great, and He's with us. And if you're here today and maybe it's not a time of storm, could you be preparing yourself now with these truths, holding on to them? Maybe somebody needs to respond to the gospel, which is what shelters us from the storms we face in life, because we always know that in Christ He is with us, and that He's cleansed us of our sins, and that He is powerful enough to raise us up, even from death. However you may be called or challenged today, we invite this opportunity to respond to the God who is with us while we stand and while we sing.